Hello, and welcome back to the Digital Divide in Education. My name is Valerie, and I'm back with Emma, Jean, Meg, and Mary to discuss some concluding thoughts and where we want to further research the area of digital divide in the K through 12 and even the college systems. So far you've heard both Mary and Jean talk about digital literacy and the impacts that has on schooling, and particularly immigrant children and specific populations within the K-12 system. And you've heard myself, Meg, and Emma talk about digital access and how it impacts rural students and the infrastructure policies that are being put into place by the past 2 to 3 presidents and the work that's being done at the policy level.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Now we're going to pass it off to Meg, who did a one-on-one semi-structured interview with a teacher in Kansas. She's going to talk about their experiences in relation to the digital divide, hopefully ones that kind of are covered by the topics that we talked about previously. But anyway, we're handing it off to you.
Thanks so much, Jean. So I had the opportunity to conduct a semi-structured interview with a current practitioner teacher who is teaching a 4th grade class of 20 students in person in rural Kansas, just south of Wichita, which is a larger city in Kansas. The students in their classroom are using iPads, and the Wi-Fi is, though typically good in the school, when it's awful for the whole day. This is a common theme that this teacher was saying happens amongst these suburban rural districts outside of these major cities. And when the wireless connection is down in these schools, he says, I typically will read a book that the class is doing together as a whole class read aloud. And he says that many of the backup assignments that he has prepared for when the internet is failing are not linear to learning goals. And he discussed that this is so disruptive to the learning process of his students. They may start with a theme on Monday, and then by Wednesday, they're jumping to something entirely different because they were depending on internet access in this community. And something interesting that he said was, and this is a quote, big cities like Wichita and immediate neighboring cities have this high-grade internet access for everyone. Small towns and suburbs in Kansas are going to have a long time to wait for anything to be improved just because of the cost. Which was just interesting to hear. I'm from New Jersey, and I have been less exposed to broadband issues in education. But just hearing this educator talk about the issues in like rural Kansas, it's hard to hear that issues impacting these smaller communities are hurting the children who are trying to like learn in a linear pattern.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I was also going to bring up, it's really interesting that you used qualitative methods to approach this to really understand the perspective of one teacher. And I guess going this in depth kind of brings to light ideas that wouldn't be able to come out otherwise in more quantitative methods. At the same time, I also think it's important to point out that because this is a qualitative methods-based research model, I guess a lot of these findings aren't necessarily generalizable to all parts of the United States.
Absolutely. To find something maybe more quantitative is gonna definitely be more generalizable. Whereas if we're looking at these qualitative case studies or specific examples, it really speaks to the truth of the teachers who are living this reality right now. So definitely understanding the perspective throughout the whole country would be great as well. Thank you, Jean.
Yeah, and going off of that, I think another really interesting aspect of this is, I don't know if you actually looked into this through your interview specifically, but I would be so curious to know kind of the class makeup in terms of demographics of this Kansas City teacher's classroom. There are so many various contextual factors that may also impact the way students approach using technology or digital spaces. And we kind of touched up on it on our previous podcast on digital literacy, but I think Mary has something more to say about that.
Yeah, thanks, Jean, for that. I think, a lot of students from different backgrounds, like we discussed in our previous podcast, and like you just reiterated, approach these digital spaces and learn in different ways. And, something that I've observed just through my interactions with students at prep schools that I've worked with. A lot of them are English language learners, and they had just recently come to the States from a foreign country right before the pandemic hit. So they were exposed to school briefly and were getting familiar with, the English language, getting familiar with the school and this new environment, all to have that taken away from them in a couple of months. And I remember hearing their stories about how they were struggling. Them and their families were struggling with, the instructions online, how to navigate these online spaces, how to actually learn to be, I guess, to put it clearly. And also, I've seen them during this past school year, so the 2020-2021 school year, and how they're dealing with online schooling. And you can just see the lack of guidance and, the physical distance from school leads them to be less engaged. And I'm curious to see what impact that has, or what impact this year has on these students. All students, of course, because this year has been a crazy one, but especially with English language learners who are learning in a space where it's not their primary language.
So, to Mary's point, one thing throughout looking at the research, I think it's really important that researchers in the digital divide space start looking at students who have this like layered effect of they're ELL learners. They have an individualized education plan, so an IEP, and are projected by the IDEA legislation for special education learners, are maybe in a rural school district. Like, we can't just keep researching specific one side of the digital divide. We have to understand how having multiple things against you, for lack of better terms, contributes to how you engage with the internet, and then how you learn about digital spaces, and how that can hinder everything from your ability to get a job to your ability to get an education, now that we're in this very digitalized workspace and school space.
Yeah, definitely. I think doing more research into that field would be just as important, considering how we mentioned before, disadvantaged communities of all kinds are especially affected by the digital divide. And you've already mentioned this somewhat, but COVID has completely changed the way schooling has happened in this past year or so. And moving right along, I know Emma made observations of her own about the impacts of COVID in her work specifically in Philadelphia with schools in the Philadelphia School District, and would love to hear more about that, Emma.
Yeah, sure. So I work in a school within the school district of Philadelphia. So I've seen how digital access has really affected the digital divide and how it's stratified education and the amount of resources students have. So while every student in the school district of Philadelphia ended up getting a laptop, and the school district ended up connecting most students to internet, it was a very slow process. It took quite a while for students to obtain Wi-Fi devices, to attain hotspots. So there was definitely a very big lag in resources. And this obviously exacerbated the situation of the pandemic and created more of a divide. And while now there are devices in these homes within the school district of Philadelphia, they expect that the digital divide will still end up increasing after these devices have to return.
So this has been the digital divide in education. If you've made it this far, we want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for contributing to the conversation. And we hope that we have inspired you in some ways to look into the digital divide, be an advocate for students who don't have digital access, and help students gain digital literacy necessary to be part of this 21st century digital boom. And with that, we're signing off, and we will see you in the next one. Goodbye.